This is Dr. Fox. Thank you all for your continued support for CRPN and CRPN Central. For more information about our mission, please contact us today at info@crpaynet.com for details.
Welcome to your first visit, and thank you again for taking part in this study.
Thanks. I'm glad I can participate in the trial and all of the patients this new treatment may help. Hey, I wanted to check. I do get paid for being in this trial, right? I'm not in it for the money, but it can help me pay for the things that I give up.
Yes, being part of the trial will give you $100 each time you complete your visit and $10 every time you complete your weekly diaries.
Wow. I don't mean to sound greedy, but by the time I have to take time off of work, find a sitter, drive here, and pay the taxes, $100 really doesn't go far. Is there some other way I could ask for help as a trial participant?
Unfortunately, the FDA is pretty clear. We aren't allowed to give you so much money that it influences your informed consent. And trust me, we'd love to give you as much money as you deserve. And that is a lot, but we're just not allowed to.
Look, I'm not getting rich being a trial participant, and I'm in this for the right reasons, but it's literally costing me money at the risk of my health. I don't know if I can afford to continue giving up so much for such a small amount of money.
I understand completely. Trust me. And it's totally up to you if you decide you want to continue in the trial. You can withdraw your consent at any time, and there's no repercussions. You won't get into any kind of trouble.
Stipends, the small amount of money that we give to some of the most heroic stakeholders in clinical research, and yet a small amount of money that is so regulated and controlled that it risks significantly harming the same people we are trying to support. Trial participants receive stipends and reimbursements in an effort to help fund their efforts, their health risks, and their livelihood while in a trial without bribing or coercing them into remaining in a trial for the wrong reasons. So where's the balance? Sponsors. The same people who are risking their life for your success are risking sometimes everything for your therapy to have the data it needs to go to market. I'm not saying you owe them a portion of the profits you've worked so hard to build, and I'm not saying you should pay them like employees, but for crying out loud, don't let them pay out of pocket to be in your clinical trial. It might be a good idea to really listen to them and to consider their needs to ensure they are accommodated and, as a result, you succeed. Welcome to CRPN Central, the official podcast of the Clinical Research Payment Network. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Fox. CRPN Central discusses the real issues with our clinical research industry to explore and identify mutually beneficial solutions for all of our stakeholders. Clinical trial participants are the core of this industry's activities and the heroes who literally put their lives on the line so that clinical trials can move forward and generations of patients may experience happier and healthier lives. As courageous and giving as they are, trial participants are rarely reimbursed fairly for the sacrifices that they make. How may we enhance stipend experiences for our sites and our clinical trial participants? Today, we will discuss trial participant stipends and reimbursements in clinical trials, which, to paraphrase the Food and Drug Administration's 2018 guidance, is the exchange of reasonable payment for an individual's trial participation in a clinical trial of which its value does not present undue influence or coercion in the trial participant's ability to give voluntary informed consent. First, we will speak with a site owner with over 2 decades of experience in successfully enrolling clinical trials. Then, we will speak with an industry expert who is dedicated to ensuring patients are fully accommodated throughout their clinical trial participation. To maintain valid comparisons, both interviews will use the same questions, and my guests did not know the questions before the interviews. We will reconvene after the interviews to compare guest perspectives and perhaps identify best practices we may adopt as individuals across the industry to improve patient stipends and reimbursements. Our first guest founded and operated a highly successful community research site for over 16 years. Felice Anderson is the president of Eclipse Clinical Research, a Tucson-based community site who has literally won global awards for its excellence in quality and high enrollments. Felice, an Eclipse have enrolled, accommodated, and reimbursed many trial participants, and I am so thankful she has taken the time to speak with me today. Please welcome with me Miss Felice Anderson. Felice Anderson, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Thank you for having me.
I wasn't planning this, but today is International Women's Day, and I am so glad that I have the opportunity to talk with such a powerful leader in our industry.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here representing.
Could you introduce yourself to the audience?
I am Felice Anderson. I have been working in clinical trials for almost 25 years and owned my own site for 16 of that. I've pretty much worked every position in the company other than medical decisions and exams because I'm not a physician. Now I'm mostly admin.
Your site's name is Eclipse, right?
Correct.
What does Eclipse focus on?
We focus on medication trials and device trials. We are in the process of expanding, so we don't do any oncology, but we do pretty much everything else from newborn vaccines all the way through geriatrics.
Today's episode is on patient stipends and reimbursements, defined as those resources that we get our patients as a result of them participating in our trials so that we can support them. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I've asked these questions to another individual, and we're going to compare what you say about these questions to what this individual said so that maybe we can try to find certain things in this industry so that we can have a better reimbursement experience for our sites and our patients.
That sounds great.
Have you ever had to work with patient stipends?
Yes, on a daily basis.
How many stipends do you think you've processed since you've started?
Oh, thousands, probably tens of thousands over the years.
That's a lot of stipends.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through the patient stipend process from start to finish?
When we bring in a new study and we're doing contract negotiations, we require that stipends be paid to patients, basically to compensate their time, their travel, lost wages for participating in a trial. It's a line item we have in our budget. We do ask for overhead in those. That's a new thing because we use a stipend vendor where we work with CleanCard. That's basically to cover those costs to the site. Once we get that approved, the stipend language will be put into the consent form, and the subjects are told from the very beginning of participation, you will make X amount per visit, and then we ask the sponsors for reimbursement. And I should back up and clarify that most of the time, the stipends are considered a line item in the schedule of activities, but there are times where the sponsors actually have us invoice every stipend. We prefer to have it as a line item just for ease for everybody, but there are times where we do have to invoice those and be reimbursed.
Making it more of like an auto pay in the schedule of assessments for patient stipends versus a manually managed invoice, it just changes the game for a site.
It does, and we're a small site, so having to invoice everything and then wait for reimbursement can be very difficult, especially when we have to put it out at the time of the visit.
Now, you had mentioned you put it in your budget negotiation. You said when we get that approved, we get that in the ICF.
Yes.
Who approves that?
Really, it's whoever is on the sponsor or CRO end of the negotiations. We have a flat stipend fee that we automatically incorporate, but a lot of times the sponsors say that's too much, so there's some back and forth negotiation on that end. We do not do any initial IRB submissions until that is finalized.
Well, and that makes sense because you want to make sure that one is approved before you move on to the next.
Right.
It makes it really tricky when it comes to startup because how many times do they want you to do IRB filings parallel to the budget negotiation?
They always do. They always ask that. In the past we have, and we have learned the hard way that, once you do that, you open that door. Then if you don't sign the budget, you can't agree, then you now have to close the IRB, and there's a lot of other things to do. So now we will submit initial regulatory packages, but we will not submit for IRB approval until we have that stipends amounts that we are agreeable to and a full budget.
Can you walk me through that patient journey of the stipend or the reimbursement as patients go through their visits?
When we speak to the patients on the phone in our pre-screening before we schedule them, they are told that they will receive a stipend per visit and that it is up to a certain amount for completing the study. We explain that as they come in, they'll receive that. If they don't complete the study for any reason, they will receive the stipend for up to what's been completed. Once they come in, that is explained again during the consent process. They're shown in the consent where it is outlined. At the end of each visit, we issue subject stipends, and we do specify in our consents that the stipends are issued for completed visits. There's a few reasons for that. Part of it is that if the subject doesn't complete the visit, then we don't necessarily get paid for it. If we don't put that, then we still have to pay the subject, and that's an out-of-pocket cost for the site. The other issue that we have run into multiple times is subjects forget to bring their IP back, and if we issue the stipend, then they don't come back in with the IP. If we tell them, go home, get your IP and bring it back, and as soon as you bring it back, we'll give you your stipend, then they have that incentive to return the IP.
Let's say that they do everything correctly. You said that you issue stipends. What is your process of issuing the stipend at your site?
Currently, we use ClinCard. The patients are given basically what amounts to a Visa debit card. So we are able to go online and we load the card while they're in the office. When they walk out the door, they have their stipend in hand. And with those cards, they can use it as a Visa debit card. They can take cash from an ATM. They can put it in their bank account. They have a lot of different options as far as spending their stipends. We, until recently, issued checks, which with this technology just doesn't work as well. We found that a lot of our patients don't have bank accounts, so they were being charged to cash the checks. And then if they were lost or stolen, we would have to issue stop payments, which costs the site money. The Clin cards are just, they're a better option for both the site and the patients. Also, if we do phone visits, we can go online, just load the stipend, and then they have it. We don't have to worry about mailing time or having them come in to pick up their stipend.
What about reimbursements? Do you ever have to work with them?
We do sometimes. There are times, for instance, right now we are doing an atopic dermatitis study, and the patients pick up a lotion or an emollient that they want to use, and they can bring us a receipt, and then they are reimbursed for that. There are times where they're reimbursed for mileage or an Uber, meals, depending on how long they're on site. Any of that is also reimbursed through ClinCard at the time the expense occurs.
Those require like an uploading of receipts or some kind of a documentation for reimbursement?
They do. So we required the receipts, and the reason for that is the sponsor requires them of us in order for us to be reimbursed.
So let's say that the patient is on a multi-year trial and they're getting a bunch of stipends. How does that work with taxes?
So it really depends on the wording that we use. And this is something I've actually been looking into a lot lately. If they are making over $600 a year, then we're required to give them a 1099. However, if it is worded as travel expense, transportation, or meals, then they do not have to be issued a 1099. So a lot of it is the way that it's worded through the consent forms and our contracts with the sponsor.
And I think the travel expense, because those are like the reimbursements, the one that require receipts, they're not necessarily revenue, but they're
Right.
recovered spending.
Correct. And we do try when we negotiate with the sponsors to make most of ours reimbursement. So reimbursement for your travel to and from the site. We have a lot of patients that are lower income and they qualify for Medicaid or they qualify for food assistance benefits. And we have had their stipends in the past affect their eligibility. And so we don't want
Oh
to
my
do that.
gosh.
Yes. They've claimed them and they reported them as income, and then that's come back as an issue. So now we're very careful as our wording so that our patients don't have to report income that is really a reimbursement for participating in a trial.
What are the benefits of patient stipends in our trials?
I think overall, we're asking the patients to give a lot of themselves to participate in a trial. Trial visits are long, they can be complex, and we're asking patients to take time out of their day, to take time off of work, to take time away from their families, to travel maybe 45 minutes to an hour from home to the site. So we are reimbursing them for that time. That is a thing we're doing well. I have seen reimbursement amounts go up. When I started in the industry, it was usually about $25 for a visit, no matter whether whether they were on site for an hour or for 6, 7 hours. So I've seen that change. The stipends are higher. We have a study right now, for example, where depending on the length of the visit and the complexity, the stipends do vary. So they get paid more if they're here longer.
And I think the stipends are definitely without undue coercion.
Yes.
They're at least helping the patients to become whole-ish.
Absolutely. We don't want to coerce them, obviously, but we do want to compensate them for their time. We ask a lot from them, and sometimes we ask them to take time off of work or take their children out of school. They absolutely should be compensated for that.
There's an interesting focus now on the patients. We've all heard the word patient centricity, and people kind of thought they knew what it meant, but I think people are actually starting to act on that. They're starting to understand the journey of the patient to see what we can do for them to help them to be a part of a clinical trial.
Yes, I think so. And I think that there was a stigma around clinical trials that is not as prevalent anymore.
Exactly. What challenges do we experience for stipends in the industry right now?
I think that what we're seeing, and a lot of this can be location, is that we, for example, have a higher minimum wage in Arizona than other parts of the country. So when we're asking patients to take time off of work to participate in a trial, the amount of money that they are missing here, if they don't have vacation time or PTO time, they're losing more of their income or a higher dollar amount than somebody in a state that has, say, a federal minimum wage. When we're looking at stipends and we're looking at issuing them and sponsor approvals, that needs to be taken into consideration, because we may in Arizona need to pay a higher stipend than somebody that is dealing with a federal minimum wage and a lower income level. As a rule, we don't want to base stipends on income, because we want a lower income person and a person that has higher income to make the same amount for the same study, so that we're not coercing. However, when you're talking about lost revenue from the patient's angle, we do have to make up for that.
The lost revenue itself, that's where it's really important if a patient is working near minimum wage, regardless
Yes.
of the state, versus if they have a higher paying job. That's a really, really critical loss. You could literally be impacting a patient's lifestyle if you are not accommodating the time that they are giving to you versus their employer.
Right, especially where we're a site that has a lot of diversity, and if we are not compensating well enough to cover lost wages and lost revenue, then we're not going to get those diverse patients to come in, because they're not going to be able to pay their bills, or they're not going to be able to buy food for their family, and that's a big issue that we see.
I've heard some patients tell me, I get paid more for being in jury duty than being a part of your trial.
Oh my goodness, I have not heard that one, so hopefully that means our site is paying well.
It's serious. I mean, we ask all of these things of patients. There are other situations in our society where we pay people more for doing something that's not nearly as important, frankly.
Right.
And for some reason, we think this is okay.
I agree. And we don't want the patients to participate because of the stipend and because they're being paid. But when it comes down to it, a lot of patients, that is a deciding factor. Yes, they're participating in a trial and they're helping with science and they're helping to bring new medications or devices to market, which is amazing, but they can't do it at the expense of their livelihood.
Yeah, we can't ask patients to pay to be a part of a trial that's going to make other people a lot of money.
Correct. Especially when they see X pharmaceutical company has posted record profits. The patients, they see that, they mention that, and they say, we're a part of this. Why are we not being compensated fairly? So it's important.
How do you think that we can improve the patient stipend experience for our sites and our trial participants?
I think we're taking steps in the right direction. I think moving from paper checks to prepaid cards, whether it be ClinCard or other services that are similar, make it easier for the participants. I think that we need to base our stipend amounts based on regions, not based on the entire US area. I think we need to provide more to our patients. I think we need to provide meals. Whether you're going to be at the site for 2 hours or you're going to be at the site all day, I think if you're taking the time to drive or take an Uber to get to the site and spend time here, that you should be able to get lunch on your way home from the sponsors. I think that we need to really think about covering Ubers more. I know that I get pushback when I ask for that. We're in a town town that does not have great public transportation. So if you're in a place like New York City, you can jump on the subway and get pretty much anywhere. Here, we only have buses. They don't run on great schedules and they don't go to all areas of town. Ubers are essential to keeping patients in the study and reimbursing that. Giving them transportation, I don't feel personally that that is coercive at all. I think that it's just helpful to get them here.
What do you think is one of the most critical unpaid patient reimbursement that we should be focusing on right now?
Actually, now that you mentioned that, it just hit me. I think without a doubt, we're not reimbursing subjects. We try, but we get pushback from the sponsors for phone visits. Sponsors feel that they don't take much time and they should not be reimbursed. I would agree that they should not be reimbursed at the level of an on site visit, but we're scheduling an appointment with the patients. We are asking them to take time out of their day to sit by the phone and either wait for us to call or to call us and check in. We're on the phone with them 10, 15 minutes, and they should be compensated for that.
The sponsor isn't paying the patient's phone bill, and the patient is volunteering a utility that they are paying for to be a part of the trial, to actually contribute data to the trial.
Yes. The other thing that we actually just got our first approval for this about a month ago, but we've been asking for years, is e-diary completion. So the subjects are more and more using their own device. They're downloading it on their own device. They're using their internet, and they're being asked to take time out to fill those out. Some of them are just one or two questions, but some of them get very complicated. And I think that we would increase compliance by offering diary completion stipends.
And diary completion stipends are not unheard of. There are sponsors that do that.
Yes.
It's not like the site's trying to take a bunch of money. We're just trying to make sure that the patients are compensated for the time that they're doing in the trial.
Exactly. And we're not asking for a lot. But even if you, for example, say $2 per completion and it's once a day, that motivates that patient with $60 a month. That covers the internet cost of logging on and taking care of those diaries. It helps them with their compliance. They're more likely to say, oh, if I make sure to do this, I'm going to get another $60 this month.
What about like childcare or anything that they would have to do to accommodate their family by being a part of the trial?
That is something that I didn't think about at all until recently. Actually, when I was at SOS, it came up. The more I think about it, I think it is essential. We actually see patients that would love to come in, but they don't want a 3 or 4-year-old there while they're having their exam or they're reading their consent. They want to be able to focus on the study visit and not have to worry about their kids. Offering childcare reimbursement essential if you want to hit the demographics that either the patient themselves have children, or maybe you're doing a pediatric study and you have siblings of the patient that need to be taken care of while the patient is here at their visit.
If I were a sponsor right now and I was listening to this podcast, I'd be thinking to myself, these people are crazy. They have no idea how much this would cost the sponsor to do this kind of stuff. How would you respond to that?
My big response is if we're not providing these stipends and we're not providing meal reimbursement or Ubers or childcare, then those patients are not enrolling. And our goal is to enroll good quality patients. So when I have a patient that says, I really want to participate in your study, but I cannot get to the site, then we've lost that. And then that makes overall study enrollment harder. If my site is seeing this, then I would guess that a lot of other sites are seeing this. Overall, the sponsor is now not meeting their enrollment goals for things that they could fix very easily. Another $50 per visit, which to you or I or to a patient can be substantial. But when you're talking about to a sponsor, $50 a visit is not going to be a substantial amount of money.
And I guarantee you $50 a visit is going to be a lot less than extending your trial period by 3 years because you can't get patients on board.
Or spending tens of thousands of dollars on a central ad campaign to try to reach more people when the sites have them right here.
You know, that's a really, really good point. We try to keep finding the patients, but then once they're in the door, we don't take care of them.
Exactly. So we have have to take care of them. We have to want them to come back to finish their current study, to participate in other studies. And, another big thing is word of mouth. If the patients are happy and we are providing childcare for an hour or we're providing an Uber, then they're going to tell their friends, and those friends are going to come in, and the sponsors are going to meet their enrollment goals faster.
When you start having trial participants advocating for clinical research and they say, this is wonderful, it's a great experience, I feel like I'm contributing to the future of healthcare and they're taking care of me, then that's when you know that you win.
Absolutely.
If I were to hand you the microphone right now and I just said, what would you like to tell the entire industry about patient stipends and recruitment, what would you tell them?
Take care of your study participants. Make them feel that they are important. They truly are. We could not do this without each and every single one of them. Value their time, value their requests and their needs. And I think that if we do that, then we're going to see the stigmas that are attached with clinical trials go away. And we're going to see more and more people willing to participate and actually eager to participate in trials.
Eager, willing, ready to help our sponsors. It only makes sense to try to take care of the same people who are volunteering their data for the next big improvement in healthcare.
Exactly. And I also think that with our new emphasis on diversity, it's even more important because those diverse populations, in my experience, tend to be the ones that shy away and are concerned about participating. So if we show them how wonderful it is and that we care about their time and we value their needs as a human, as a parent, as maybe a caregiver, then they're going to be more likely to come in, they're going to participate, they're going to enjoy their experience, and they're going to tell friends.
Oftentimes in research, we know as administrators, it's very transactional. Sign this contract, do this work, you get paid for this work. But I think what you are saying as far as the patients go is we need to move beyond that and make research part of a community outreach, community support system so that the patients, as a result, they become participants in the trial. They will volunteer themselves into the community. You won't have to recruit them. They're going to be a part of the community that supports them.
Yes, and I think that's so important. Personally, for us on the site level, we're working to become more known in the community so that when we call or we recruit, people say, oh, I know them. It's the same thing when we have our participants and they tell their friends and they say we had a great experience, then their friends, when we call for a different study, will say, oh, I know them.
Felice, most importantly, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central and sharing your story. It was an excellent conversation, and I look forward to sharing this with the audience.
Thank you again for having me, and I'm excited to have done it.
I'll talk to you later.
All
right, bye.
Bye.
Our next guest has worked across our industry for over 20 years. KimberLee Heidmann is the Executive Vice President of Patient Experience and Customer Success at Scout Clinical, an organization dedicated to face-to-face, virtual, and hybrid clinical meeting planning, patient payments, travel, logistics support, and virtual collaborations and education for our patients and our front lines. KimberLee has extensive knowledge and experience helping our industry's clinical trial participants, and I am so thankful she has taken the time to speak with me today. Please welcome with me Ms. KimberLee Heidmann. KimberLee Heidmann, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I didn't realize this, but today is International Women's Day. I wanted to wish you a very happy International Women's Day. I admire you greatly, and I really appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is a special day. It's exciting because I've had the opportunity now in the last almost 26 years to work with wonderful men and women. And lately, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of women in different roles. Everything from women who are running sites, women who are obviously the investigators, and then also women in regulatory. It's really wonderful, and I've learned so much from them.
Would you be willing to introduce yourself to the audience?
I started in the life sciences in basically the late 90s. I was living in California and had the opportunity as a younger individual to work for a couple of investigators in neuroscience. As I progressed with those individuals, I began to really just have a love for research. Very much enjoyed that, learned a lot from those investigators and from the staff, kind of caught the research bug, but my husband and I decided to move back to Texas and wanted to be back closer to family, so I needed to find another position that I could do. I found a company called Meeting Protocol Worldwide, and it was exciting because they were focused on clinical trial site education, and that very much was right up my alley. family meeting protocol rebranded this year under our new company name, which is Scout. We have 3 divisions of the company. We still have our Scout Meetings division, we have our Scout Academy division, and then obviously our Scout Clinical division, which is our patient services division. I currently serve as the Executive Vice President of Patient Experience and Customer Success. Now I really get to work closely with individuals like you, professionals in the site space, thought leaders in the way that we innovate and we bring new services and increase our service level here at Scout.
Today's episode is on patient stipends and reimbursements. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'm going to ask these questions to another individual in the industry. And we're going to compare what you say to this other individuals so we can help our patients to navigate through the clinical research journey, maybe without having problems.
It's great.
When it comes to patient stipends and reimbursements, can you walk me through the entire process from beginning to end?
I think it's important to define terms at the beginning. In our industry, we get a lot of mixed understanding of what a stipend is and what a reimbursement is. And in many cases, a sponsor or a CRO, even sites, even patients will use the word reimbursement to kind of create a category of services. A reimbursement would be when a patient incurs an out-of-pocket expense directly associated with a visit that they are then compensated back. So there's recompense for that. They have outlaid funds, let's say for a taxi or a meal, and they present a receipt for that, and then they are reimbursed for that exact expense. On the other hand, you may have a stipend. So in this case, this is going to be a flat rate or a fixed rate payment that is going to be made for something in particular. It's very specific, but it's a flat rate. And the patient is not required to present any sort of receipt or any documentation to support that. So really important that we define the terms on that because the process is different. If I'm a patient receiving reimbursement, then the onus is on me to make the organization for all of my logistic needs to get to the visit. The site or the sponsor could be using any various type of reimbursement methodology. It could be that the site has their own process for providing reimbursement to the patient, or it could be that the sponsor is using a third-party provider to actually process those reimbursements. In any methodology that the sponsor is implementing there, the site is using, there will be some responsibility for the patient to present those receipts, maybe upload them to a system or give them to a study coordinator. While it's helpful to the patient, you can see where there's actually a bit of burden. As the patient, I have to incur the expense and then wait to have that reimbursement. And as the site, I've got to go through all these financial gymnastics to get the receipts, put them in a system. It's very important to reimburse our patients no matter what. But if we can mitigate the expense at the outset, and instead of requiring them to outlay those funds, use a service like Scout that has the ability to, on a global scale, organize and pay for all of that travel and transport, that will reduce that reimbursement impact.
Especially when it comes to patient reimbursements, the very beginning always starts at the ICF, the informed consent. Oftentimes, the informed consents are very important on how we spell out what stipends patients are receiving across the course of the trials, and even sometimes the reimbursements. On an industry average, how long do you think it takes a patient to receive the money from their submissions?
It depends on the process, the organization that's being used. In some cases, we've had feedback from patients, advocacy groups, caregivers, and also sponsors that some of these patients are waiting months at a time for these payments to be made. And when you start looking at the financial impact that participation in a trial can have and waiting months, that is going to impact the sponsor's retention. I've had multiple times when our patient liaisons will reach out and escalate and say, this patient has asked for expedited payment, or this site had experience with another vendor and they're very nervous because they had these delays with their payments. If a sponsor is utilizing a third party and if a site is utilizing a service like Scout, they should have the highest expectation that that vendor will turn around those payments within a few days, if possible. Really, we should be expediting payments to patients. There's so many digital options for payment. So that's another thing that I encourage sponsors to ask their providers is, what are the payment methodologies that you use globally? How can you expedite payments to these patients because we can't have them waiting? You brought up about the ICF and the regulatory piece of this. We have to share with the participants what they're going to receive at the outset. They have to understand what the requirements are, what they need to do in terms of either stipend or reimbursement. And that language has to be very clear.
So it also depends on the site. Oftentimes, sites, they don't have the money to pay the patients unless they finish their pass-throughs. So if receipts are submitted to a site, they have to turn around and submit an invoice to the CRO. CRO has to go through and validate it, and the sites might get paid in months, which means the patients don't get paid for months. There are sites with sufficient financial batteries to where they can just afford to pay the patient and wait on payments from the CROs, but it depends. I went through a situation with one site where they literally had to stop enrolling patients because the stipends were not getting paid.
Yeah, that's horrible. And you're right. A lot of the sites would come up to us and say, we have a process for payments. We have our own financial department. We have a process for how this is working. Why should we use a service like Scout? Even if the sponsor is paying for it and Scout is contracted by the sponsor, what is the value in this for us? And what you're touching on right there is part of the major value of this. And you've said this so eloquently multiple times that while the sites may believe that they're being compensated from the sponsor for these activities, it really isn't covering all of the work that goes into this for the sites. We want to build the trust with the sites so that you know that we'll handle this in a timely fashion with the least amount of burden on you. We would encourage the sites to talk with us and build the relationship and let us take that burden.
What are some of the benefits of patient stipends in our trials?
One of the things that we're doing right is the regulatory pendulum has started to swing, and there's more flexibility in terms of organizations like Scout, SOS, other sites, your organization, bringing to light that the participants of clinical trials need to be supported. And this is not a regulatory deviation. It is not coercion or inducement to offset financial burden by offering a stipend. I personally believe that every study should offer their patients a stipend in addition to coordinating their logistics. And that's not just because this is the service I provide. I'm also a family member, and some of us are touched by clinical research personally. And so what we're doing right is that we're calling attention to it, we're making noise about it, and we are seeing on our side the adoption more and more for stipends on studies. The positive regulatory response is increasing, and especially as we're trying to reach more underserved and diverse populations, we're seeing some wonderful things coming across from sponsors being really innovative about how they can use stipends.
The term patient-centric, it's not a buzzword anymore. We are actually listening to our patients. We're understanding what their needs are. I know that there's some initiatives on trying to make sure that stipends for trials are tax exempt.
Yeah, so this is a hot topic right now. The taxable payment issue is really an important topic to discuss. If a participant in clinical research in the United States receives a payment either for a stipend or a per diem or a reimbursement without a receipt, those payments are considered by the IRS to be taxable payments. There are many of us in the industry that have been investigating with sponsors and lobby our government to make changes because this is precluding people from being able to participate in research. And we believe that they should not be taxed on these payments. But for right now, the IRS is a big ship. It's not going to turn quickly no matter what we do. We're going to have to fight for this. This is going to have to be something that sites and sponsors and CROs and third-party vendors fight for. But in the meantime, we should be looking at how we mitigate these costs to our patients and how we reduce the impact that tax impact can have.
There might be some routes through the nonprofit worlds too. If you could somehow justify the utilization of participation in clinical research as a nonprofit effort. The government already understands nonprofits and its benefit to society. And I think that we can all agree that ever since COVID, we know that clinical research has a direct impact on our society. I've been in situations where we've had patients call the day after their visit. Where's my stipend money? I need this stipend money to pay my phone bill.
Yes.
I think it's really important to understand that the patients who are putting their lives on the line for clinical research are doing this. They're sacrificing a lot. They're finding daycare. They're finding the time off of work. They're literally maybe even incurring health problems as a result of this. The very least that we could do is give them good access to money so that they can continue to serve as patients on our trials.
Yeah. And the way that we give them good access is not to lock them in to a type of payment. One of the things that we all know, being in this industry for a long time, is that it was very innovative at one time to present a patient with a debit card. But we know now that there are limitations on how those cards are used. You can't go to a gas station and put gas in your car. Not a lot of people know that, but a lot of these cards have limitations. You have to go inside. You can't just use it outside. And what if I can't walk very well or I can't see very well? There's certain merchants now, we see that they want pins and things have gotten more difficult. So I think giving good access also means that your provider is able to offer various types. We really should be meeting patients where they are. You use the scenario about I need it to pay my phone bill. There are some cards that you can go get cash out, but what are you going to do? You're not going to drive that cash over to the phone company and pay your bill with it. You need to have a way that you can put that money in your bank account. What if you don't have a bank account? How are you going to be paid? We need to be constantly innovating. And at Scout, we offer all of our payment types to all of our patients. They get to choose, and we don't change how that works for the site, and we don't change how much it costs the sponsor. Offering the greatest flexibility is what we should be partnering to do.
That patient that comes in and said, I need the stipend to pay my phone bill. If your phone is shut off and you have to use an app to get the money for your stipend, you're done. You can't even access it because you don't have the resources to do it. We can't isolate or alienate patients who do not have access to the technologies that make it convenient, but may not be relevant to some of these patients.
Yeah, technology makes it convenient for you if you have access to technology, or you can use it. Some of our elderly patients, they don't even have to be elderly. I mean, if you asked my husband to use an app to participate, he would tell you no. He doesn't want to do that. Technology should be leveraged where it's a good tool. And where it meets a limitation, humans should be going beyond that to meet the need.
What challenges do you think we're experiencing right now in the stipend industry for clinical research?
I think you touched on a big one, which was the tax related implications. The second one would be the regulatory implications and hurdles. I'm going to say this not from a perspective of that you can't use stipends from a regulatory standpoint, because you can. What it is misinformation and lack of understanding. A lot of times you'll have feedback from a sponsor and they'll say, well, you can't do that. That's coercion or that's inducement. We've never done it that way. We can't do it that way. And the reality is that pendulum has shifted, because patient centricity, like you said, is not just a buzzword anymore. We're doing it. The IRBs and the ECs are on board. They understand, and they're doing a great job at regulating how we continue to do this. That's a challenge that we're facing right now, is adoption. The last would be the execution, because we've got to be more flexible in the execution and make sure that the patients are receiving them in a timely fashion. Reimbursements, that is widely accepted. We don't have a lot of misinformation out there other than defining terms, but the hurdles there with reimbursement is it's burdensome. It's difficult for the sites and the patients as well.
Something I learned getting ready for this podcast, I looked up the FDA's 2018 regulations on patient stipends, and it says right there in clear language that the FDA does not consider reimbursements as coercion or undue influence.
Yeah.
Everyone just says we can't pay them too much, but we have regulations in place that protect patients from the difference between just handing them a bunch of money to be part of a trial and making sure that they are taken care of with the expenses that they must incur to be a part of the trial.
That's why you see the shift in terms of more adoption, but there's got to be education. You took the time to go in and read that and understand it. We as third-party providers of these services need to be educating and collaborating. We need to be working in a consultative role with our sites that we're partnering with and with our sponsors and CROs. We are supposed to be the thought leaders on this. We are supposed to be the subject matter experts. We need to be proactive. And I know that our regulatory group here at Scout, they are responsible for staying ahead of that guidance, not just FDA guidance, not just guidance for the IRS, but outside of the US as well. We have to be able to give you all good advice and leadership and staying ahead of that so that you can trust us.
Who determines the value of the stipend?
There's layers of this. So you start with the top layer, which is what are we allowed to do per country guidance. In the United States, we have a lot of flexibility. We're very fortunate that we do have the flexibility. And like you said, the FDA guidance is positive towards this, as much as we do that in other countries where we do see more impact on that. Let's talk then about the United States. So when we are looking at those stipends, many times the sponsors will come to us when we're first looking at setting those pass-through expenses. What do we anticipate paying these patients? There's some central IRBs that have put out some excellent guidance on what they recommend. And it's very good recommendation on what's reasonable and moderate, but also allowing for flexibility. The next layer would be, what would a third party like Scout recommend? And what we're going to recommend is going to be based on IRB EC feedback, as well as what has been utilized in the past, so experiential data. And then you're going to have the sponsor layer, where the sponsor is going to say, well, this is our policy. This is how much we are willing to provide in stipends, and this is what we've always done. And then when you come down to the site level, now you've got individual site management of this. You've got local IRBs, you've got institutional requirements. So now you've added in another layer. So when you ask the question about what actually goes into the ICF, all of that has to be considered. We can get down to an ICF where we've said, okay, this is what we're going to offer. And that goes to an institution. And that institution says, no, wait, we offer X or we offer Y. And in Scout's perspective and in our experience, that is usually where that decision lies.
How may we improve patient stipend experiences for our sites and our trial participants?
I think for the sites, we need to have more focus on decreasing the amount of time and energy that is taken to actually get these payments made. We need to start having more conversations like you and I have had about how do we leverage services like Scout to support the sites in a way that the sites are comfortable and confident, and they understand that it is not undermining their relationship with the sponsor or their managing of their study. There's a long way to go there. And that's why my focus in 2024, as I've said, is very much on having this conversation with the sites and doing this right. We want to do it differently. We want to do it better. And then in terms of the patients themselves, I'm very excited about the various types of payments and methods that we are increasing our methodology to take payments to patients. I think that's really the time to fulfillment and the methodology of fulfillment, and making those flexible to each participant's need. You cannot have a one size fits all. We've all got to get on board that we can't be advocating just for what we think is the best methodology. It's got to be a pool or a cachet of options for these participants.
Definitely awareness and adoption and understanding flexibility. Can you tell me how many different ways we can pay our patients right now?
Well, it depends on who you're using. You know, a lot of sites are locked in. I talked to a site recently. Their methodology is still checks. It's how their financial department works. There are a lot of payment methods, though. We talked about the debit card. Now, if you're using a debit card globally, you're going to run into a lot of issues. There are studies that are actually using various types of gift cards, not just that kind of standardized vendor provided debit card, but also virtual types of cards, virtual payments for meal stipends, using a partnership with meal delivery companies so that you can actually provide a stipend, but it can be used towards those meals. Payment methodologies like Venmo and Zelle and PayPal. These are things that if your third-party provider cannot give you those, you need to be looking, because these are very important, especially for our adolescent and young adult populations. They want to use these types of services. And then we need to keep our direct to bank transfer for the patients for whom that is best. But as the world rolls out new payment methodologies, clinical research needs to be adopting them as well. We need to be looking at everything,
including like cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And
our chief innovation officer would be very excited to hear you say that. We do talk about it all the time, about someday we could see this happening. That's still, I would say, definitely still in the back of the innovation pocket over here. But yeah.
If I were to hand you the microphone right now and I just said, what would you like to tell the entire industry about patient stipends and reimbursements? What would you tell them?
To start considering how important it would be to you personally if you were participating in a clinical trial, or you had a loved one, a friend who was participating in a clinical trial, and to start putting yourself in the position of what they are having to do to continue to participate and the burden that that will cause, and think about the impact of that burden on patient retention and the potential for a patient to say, I want to, but I just can't keep it up. And think about how we can then then come alongside them and say, you can keep it up. We're going to help you get this done. Put yourself in that position, and it will help you to increase your understanding and your compassion and your sympathy. And it will help us better position ourselves to have the conversation about how we're going to do it. And think about the site journey. Let's think about, what does day to day look like at a site?
Put yourself in the patient's shoes, have an understanding, and importantly, have everyone in the industry coming together to work together for that patient, not for the best budget, not to try to save money, but to truly understand that patient's need so that we can finally come together and meet that patient's need so that patient can be a part of the trial, the sponsors get their data, and generations of people to come will have access to better technology and medicine.
That's right.
It's a perfect equation, right? Let's get on that.
Let's get on it. Let's do it. I'm in.
KimberLee, importantly, thank you so much for coming on to CRP and Central. An excellent conversation, and I can't wait to share this with the audience.
Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Felice has worked on the front lines in almost every position for over 25 years. Her site, Eclipse Clinical Research, has spent the past 16 years performing trials in almost every indication for her community and her industry. We must be conscious of our trial participants' life situations and carefully word ICFs and languages to ensure stipends do not negatively impact taxes or government benefits. And we are moving closer to patient-centric cultures with increased stipend amounts for complex and demanding burdens to our patients and additional support options such as ride sharing or daycare support. And rather than deciding as a nation on study-wide stipends, we must consider stipends specific to the needs, living conditions, and minimum wage requirements of each site. If we don't treat our trial participants like human beings, value their time, and consider their needs, they will not continue enrollment, an absolute cost and justification to ensure our participants have what they need to remain in our trials. And if we engage in our community in a positive and supportive way with our participants, they may advocate in their community and refer their friends to our sites, and therefore enhance diverse trial enrollments overall. KimberLee has worked in the industry for over 26 years. She started at Meeting Protocol Worldwide, and now at Scout, she works with industry thought leaders to optimize site and trial participant experiences throughout the journey. It's critical to understand the defined terms of stipends with flat rates and reimbursements with fixed expenses, and that every site, sponsor, and even trial may have their own burdensome processes that third-party vendors like Scout may assist with for reduced burden and improved quality. We must offer stipends and reimbursements to our trial participants at the very least in days, not months, and the regulatory pendulum is swinging toward patient centricity. This will be critical to recruit diverse patient populations. However, we as an industry must raise awareness, education, and adopt the processes to support flexible payment methodologies that leverage technology without alienating or isolating trial participants who do not or cannot access these technologies. We must put ourselves in the trial participants and the site's shoes to improve stipend processes and come together as an industry to truly revolutionize stipends and reimbursements for enhanced and streamlined clinical trial operations. Both of our guests unanimously agreed participant stipends are critical to diverse enrollments in clinical trials, and that we must consider the overall needs of our trial participants with comprehensive stipends and reimbursements. And while Felice seeks to engage with her community for holistic and sustained advocacy, KimberLee is working toward flexible and adaptive payment methodologies for optimal accessibility to stipend and reimbursement payments. So, how do we enhance stipend experiences for our sites and our clinical trial participants? While Felice is working diligently on the front lines to ensure her trial participants are supported, and KimberLee is working to develop logistics and systems to deliver payments, both of our guests resonated similar strategies. To improve participant stipend and reimbursement processes, we must consider trust, flexibility, and understanding. Work with local and industry communities to build relationships with potential trial participants and research sites. Build systems and processes to adapt to the needs of those we seek to serve, and value the time, sacrifices, and perspectives of the same heroes who are navigating through these clinical trials to make sure they are not only avoiding out-of-pocket costs, but also to ensure that they are respected and appreciated for years to come. Thank you for listening to today's very special stipend and reimbursement podcast. Our patients are the most critical component of our industry, and if we want fast and reliable data, we must consider their needs throughout their trial enrollments. If you feel as strongly about participant support during clinical trials, please consider contacting your senators and representatives and tell them about the importance of tax-exempt trial stipends for the heroes of our society. Thank you to Felice and KimberLee for sharing their experiences with us today. Thank you to Courtney Alexander and Momin Saleem for volunteering in today's CRPN Short. Finally, thank you to my CRPN sponsors for helping to make this podcast possible. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on CRPN Central.